Pleasure to welcome to the program Yanni Tzilkigakis. Close?
Yes, very good,
okay,
Harold. Good job.
Who is our guest, and he's a very interesting person. He's billed as he's got a lot of interest in. Well, he's a political activist, and he's also a commentator on things, and he's done a great deal of work in the realm of quantum mechanics and that sort of thing, physics, and he's got a very interesting take on the human condition. And Yanni, welcome so very, very much conversation. Great pleasure.
Thank you, Harold. I'm very honored to be part of this program.
Well,
one of the longest running, if not the longest running.
Well, no, you get it straight, because it is the longest running, still running program in what they call public access in the country, in the world, I guess, for that matter. But there's television before. There was television before there was cable, and there's a longer history of television or communications. But all that aside, pleasure to welcome you.
I'm glad to be here.
Now, share with us, if you would, please, Yanni, your background. Born and raised, educated a little bit, and then I know you got a very checkered background. You've done a lot of very interesting work. And so if you could, where were you born and raised, educated,
yes,
that sort of thing?
Born and raised in Athens, Greece, with roots from the mainland and the island of Crete. Very proud of my ancestry.
Oh, yeah.
And went through the Greek education system, graduated valedictorian, then I studied physics.
At the university there?
The University of Athens.
Okay, great. Okay.
Did
you have a focus of attention that you had?
Actually, I always wanted. I call myself an aspiring philosopher.
Oh,
but
right.
Philosopher,
well, being Greek, that's really good. There's a rich tradition, yeah.
But the philosopher, like in the what's the archetype of what a human being should be, which means to conquer all knowledge, not a philosopher in the philosophizing sense.
Yes, I see. You're right. So you have a kind of comprehensive overview, it would
exactly.
seem.
So even though I was urged by my teachers to go into humanities and classical studies, and they told me I was a theoretical mind, I chose. I'm also a contrarian in a sense.
Oh,
I chose to go into sciences and engineering, so I went into physics for the main reason that I don't like black boxes.
You don't like black boxes?
Black boxes in knowledge and understanding. So I thought if I don't study sciences and math when I'm young, then it will always remain kind of like a black box.
You seem to like transparency.
I love transparency, and that ties in with my political views and activism.
Right. And how was the family setting? Was it encouraging of things intellectual and so forth, or around the dinner table? Did you
always the Greek dinner table? Also, be it like just the core nucleus of the family, like the siblings and then the parents. Also, also when you have relatives or at friends, it's always a beehive of activity, intellectual activity, always discussions about politics, about history, science, religion, name it.
I think the family setting can be almost more interesting or more relevant to somebody's mindset and everything than work at a university often, that early grounding that you get in the family.
Absolutely, and it's not early, it's continuing. I learned so much at the dinner table, hearing the stories of my parents through how they fought through life. That was a parallel university, and I'm really thankful to them.
And you took a bachelor's degree at Athens?
At the University of Athens.
Did you do advanced study after that somewhere, or have you picked it up?
Yes, I was admitted with a scholarship at the National Center for nuclear research.
Where was that?
That's in Athens. And the center is named Democritus, after the father of the atomic theory.
Yeah, really? Okay.
And so I did a year of postgraduate, coursework and research. And then I decided, because I have this Ulysses syndrome.
Ulysses, yeah.
always yearning to leave Ithaca and go look for Cyclops and Lestrygons and Cyrus.
Right. Where would we be without ancient Athens? The classical thing.
And so then I came to the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign.
At Urbana,
yes.
In what? Is that still physics or what?
Physics, yes.
Yeah, okay,
theoretical physics. I got accepted with a scholarship.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that was I crossed
and
the Atlantic.
And did you take a degree there? Did you take a master's degree or something?
Yeah. Master's degree
in physics.
And Ph.D.
And Ph.D. there also in physics.
Yes.
Boy, you got a grounding in physics and so forth, and there's a lot of changes going on. I don't know, you got Mr. Einstein, and then you have quantum mechanics. It's a pretty wide field. There's a lot of different takes on it.
Even though Einstein did not believe in quantum mechanics, his famous dictum is that God cannot play dice.
Right,
but it ends up that not only God plays dice, he's really good at it.
That's funny. That's really funny. Yeah, but it's an
that was the core of the famous Bohr Einstein
so you have
debate.
A couple of years. You're still young and everything like that, but then along comes after we get that and everything, and then we get this thing, and then you got the second law of thermodynamics and all that, and then along comes Brian Greene and Kaku, and they come up with this, recently, the string theory. Have you been delving into that and what the implications of it might be in terms of the structure of this universe, particularly the idea that we may be having parallel universes? And is it a closed or open system to accommate the second law of thermodynamics?
It's a fascinating theory, the fact that you can have many multiple lives. Short as it could give an explanation of the déjà vu experience that many people have.
Oh, that's
actually we maybe right now there could be replicas of us in other universes doing like exploring like different pathways of possibilities. Every point in life is a turning point. Something happens, they say the wave function collapses, so you take a certain path. However, the other possibilities are still there. Only they're not realized, but theoretically they could be part of the cosmos, of the realm.
That's relatively new, that thing. It's like 10 dimensions they find, and
26 compactified down to 10. It's a fascinating theory.
And it's like a theory to somebody in the general public, or myself. You could think like a sink full of soap bubbles, and the soap bubbles are connected, and they have wormholes, perhaps, between parallel universes. So our Big Bang, 13.7 is it 7 billion years ago, the beginning of this, it's staggering when you think there was nothing, and then all of a sudden everything exploded 17 or 13.7 billion years ago.
But
where the hell did that come from?
I think that's a common misconception. It's a linguistic misconception, because when we say that the world was created from a vacuum, that vacuum is far from being empty.
Oh, the vacuum.
It's full of matter and energy.
Dark energy? No.
Energy. And then it's the excitations of that vacuum that create the particles, the physical particles, the matter as we know it.
That appeared as we understand it 13.7 odd billion years ago.
Right.
Just out of, and there was then something prior to that out of which it came? Or could it be a thing, if you have a soap bubble and it connects and then there's a universe, then it could be connected through a worm, that it would be coming from another thing pre-existing, which would mean, and it just comes around to my way of thinking. I don't know, I'm wrong maybe, because I'm 1 inch deep in everything, so I'm very, very superficial.
1 inch is quite deep.
Well, it is, really. It should be maybe ½ inch.
Either below the surface or above.
Yeah, right. You're right. But I mean, it means that whether the second law holds, the second law of thermodynamics, holds or not, if it's a closed or open system.
Yes.
We're assuming closed with the second law.
Yes. Yes, that's
now, if there was this other universe, that would be maybe an opening upon an open system, and so does the second law
still apply to the bigger system, but it could not apply to the subsystem.
Yeah, right. Because it would be different. And so, does the second law of thermodynamics still hold? Do you know Howard Bloom?
Yes.
You know Howard? Are you friends with Howard?
No, I'm not friends, but I heard him speak at the Penn Festival, I think 2 years ago.
Interesting fellow. We've done a number of programs here with him. He's written the book, The God Problem. Have you seen that book? It's a major book, intellectual tour de force. And he's talking about the intellectual history and all of that. Mm-hmm. And he claims that it's all just, the second law doesn't hold, and yet it's generally accepted by the scientific community as part of the laws of thermodynamics, which seem to have an effect or are important in terms of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, you should, if somebody studies the history of the
physics.
Of episteme, of the sciences, you would see that always everything works until it doesn't. and people believed in Ptolemy's geocentric system.
That was Ptolemy,
for like 700, 800 years. And they kept adding epicycles, fitting the new data. And they say, oh, you see, by including a new epicycle, we explain the data until
Copernicus.
Aristarchus has already formulated.
That's right.
Aristarchus,
another Greek, right?
From Samos. He had already formulated the heliocentric system. But for some reason, the geocentric system had prevailed.
Yeah, and they would have people, they would go, a lot of that was, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of that was based on the orbit pathways of Jupiter, and they would have people who would be showing, for after the first, telescopes and things were developed, and Copernicus, they would have people who were arguing, but this is here, to keep a geocentric view of the universe, perhaps for religious reasons or for other reasons, and he was condemned by the church. Copernicus or Galileo was condemned by the church for invalidating a view of the universe that people had a sense of identity wrapped up in for a long time.
It was not. There was no reason you saw the fight between, which is a pseudo fight between religion and science. It happened only in the West. In the East, in the Byzantium, which carried the Greek intellectual heritage.
It sure did.
You didn't have. You had actually. You didn't have dark ages. You had actually light.
Yeah.
You had sciences. You had the technology. It was amazing.
Yeah, I think
I think people, especially in the West, ignore these 1200 years of the Byzantine Empire.
And don't forget, also in that period, there was the carrying over, or the salvation of the classical traditions in part by Islam, and what happened in Andalusia.
It was that
gets politically touchy nowadays.
Exactly. I think many people from the progressive group, they try to actually stop this Islamophobia and this Arabophobia that has been artificially created in our society since September 11.
From imperialism.
And instead, they're trying to do like a revisionist view of history and say, oh, look, we got all the ancient wisdom from the Arabs, which is not true. The ancient wisdom, the Arabs, they got it from the Greeks, the Byzantines. They translated the Almagest, like Ptolemy's work, and all the ancients around the 10th century.
Right.
And of course, and not only that, not only the Arab Enlightenment came, again, it's rooted from the Greeks, but the transmission of that to the West happened through when the Byzantine scholars started fleeing to the West, to Italy, as the Byzantine Empire was collapsing with the invasion of the Ottomans. One interesting, I did some.
When is that? When did the invasion of the Ottomans and Anatolia?
Well, it went through a course of 200 years, started by taking the Asia Minor, little by little, and then the fall of Constantinople in 29th of May, 1453.
53, that's the year Columbus was
53.
born, I think.
Oh, yeah?
I think, I'm not sure, no, that doesn't make sense. 1450, I think so, yeah.
It was 40 years before the discovery, the discovery of the Americas by Columbus.
Big event, another big event in history. Big event. Yeah.
But one very interesting tidbit of information, I don't think many people would know it, is that I did some research. There is this project called the Mathematical Genealogy Project, which basically they trace your intellectual roots, your intellectual DNA.
Together? Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
And they found out that actually about 1.2 million Western scholars, mostly in mathematics, this is for mathematics, they traced their roots to 10 Byzantine Greek scholars that came from Byzantium, and they settled in the universities in Europe and Central Europe.
After what period?
That was in the 1400s.
1400s.
So you see, shortly before the final collapse of the Byzantine Empire, the fleeing had already, the intellectual brain drain had already started happening, which is good because that's where the Renaissance came from, and not necessarily from the Arabs. And one very interesting historical tidbit is that Leonardo da Vinci's mentor, his name was Ioannis. I have the same name. Ioannis Argyropoulos. That was his mentor. So even Leonardo da Vinci, he can trace his intellectual DNA to the Greeks.
Yeah, you had was it the Medicis or no?
Yes, in Florence.
In Florence, and they were the power and everything, and I think there was a great deal of attention given to the Divine One, be a master artist and so forth. But he also, one of the things that was, he was such a Renaissance man. It's too small to put it. But anyway,
the prototype philosopher.
Yeah,
that's what the Renaissance man.
Yeah, but as usual, or as so much of human history, is that you have the intellectuals, you have intellectuals and so forth, and the intellectuals are generally co-opted by the political power of the time because they have all the power in terms of material reality. And he developed a siege machine that gave an advantage to the Medicis in terms of being able to conquer other people.
Of course, and also
and that's why he was particularly loved, and Michelangelo also was very well known in his own time. Often artists are not, they're buried and forgotten. But it's the intellectual community, this maybe we can get around to contemporary things, is co-opted generally by the political class du jour as we go through history.
Right, but eventually...
we want to get to the current political situation because I know you're a political activist, but isn't it true that generally there's a leadership class that sets the tone for the society, generally plutocratic, and generally people are wallowing around like serfs on a feudal estate where all the assets are owned by a tiny politically oriented class of materialistically oriented plutocrats.
Exactly, and that plagues mainly the field of economics, which was at the turn of the 19th century, like at the turn of the 20th century, around the end of the 19th century. That's when the concept of the science of economics, the science, quote unquote, that's a big...
The Chicago guys wanted it to be a science.
And J.B. Clark here at Columbia, who is actually the first president of the American Economic Association.
Okay, really? Okay.
And he's revered by everybody. He is... that's when the big monopoly interest, they bought the academia. And they found that's when the term economics started coming in. Before economics, it was political economy.
Well, I would have made, but I would have made a case for Adam Smith, 1776, the invention of the steam engine, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and so forth, which carries it back to the modern era. Probably began, the one that's ending now maybe, with 1776.
Right.
I mean, this is Europe-based, but there were things going on. But that was
yeah, with Hume and Adam
Hume.
Smith.
David Hume was huge.
David Hume is huge, yes. And then you have also the French, the French school with Turgot and Quesnay and
Voltaire was a giant.
Voltaire was a giant, and yes, the French Enlightenment.
But it seems like, because 1,000 years after Rome, we're Eurocentric by and large because we're European background, or the world tends to be, and with some, particularly after 1492. What was the date of, anyway?
1453 of Constantinople.
1453.
That was a big.
1492. Yeah, I think that was the year of Columbus's birth. But anyway, that was the beginning of the European expansion and that kind of thing in the modern era. But there always been for 1,000 years after Rome. Rome ruled for 1,000 years nearly and so forth. And after Rome fell apart, you had a period about 1,000 years of political legitimacy was assumed to be done through hereditary families of dynastic families. So you had counts and dukes and kings and so forth that were established. And that was where political authority supposedly resided. Until about 1776 it started breaking down because of the technological extension was coming through the Industrial Revolution. You had a revolution across the ocean with a bunch of bumpkins from the standpoint of the ancient regime in France and so forth. So that's the beginning of a modern history that we may be coming to the end of now.
But I don't think...
I mean, that's a summary.
Yes, even though many people try to say that we have switched, we have graduated from feudalism, the good old feudalistic model, into an capitalist one with the advent of the industrial revolution, and basically you claim that this is the paradigm we still live in. I don't think we have passed feudalism yet.
What we haven't passed.
We're still in feudalism. That's what I claim as a thinker.
In fact, we're going to participate in something later this year on that issue of favored. But I think it's always been. I don't know. Well, let's just go back to the beginning. 200,000 years, Homo sapien appeared, apparently out of the evolutionary process in Africa. We're all Africans. And it was 200,000 years, 10,000 generations. It was 10,000 years ago that they discovered agriculture,
But at the time, the continents were not really separated. So.
Well, no, that was a historical period. That's historical. 8 or 10,000 years. There isn't that much geologic change. The what do you call it? The continental drift and so forth. But one thing, once you have civilization, Mesopotamia, Egypt, whatnot, iron corn, Immer, the cereals that were domesticated, and rice, and then corn and mace, and you had that, and we had civilization, and from there on, we don't know too much what it was like in the wandering and gathering stages, which most of our tenure was spent in Africa. They got to Australia by about 50,000 years. 5,000, but it's always been, it seems to me, always been one thing sure is that in each case, which continues, you have a small plutocratic class that really owns and runs everything. So you had pharaohs, and you had Nebuchadnezzar, and then you had a brief little period of something kind of like Periclean Greece, but it was based on slavery. It was based on slavery.
That's another I think another area where language plays games, because what we call or what we know slavery, for example, with the slave trade, the African slave trade, is not exactly what the term of the slave was back in Greece. For example, in the Periclean democracy times, basically what we call the slaves were actually part of the economic unit called the family, and actually based they were all accounted for. So in a sense, it was a form of representative democracy. So the head of that household was representing everybody. Like the slaves were, in a sense, considered as part of his family.
Well, okay. Maybe you're playing with words, you know. Aristotle said, Aristotle, you know, he was a pretty smart guy. And he said that he recognized that it was, you know, you had a few citizens who were there talking and all that, but essentially it was still based upon slavery. And he said it would ever need be so that there be slavery. It was necessary. There's no sense saying it isn't necessary. It was necessary so that there could be what is needed by the, you know, by the leadership class and the philosophers and so forth. And it would always need be so until or unless the loom learned to weave and the plectrum learned to play. Now, we may be coming to the modern period now.
Which is where we're
heading now. But practically all cloth is now created by automatic looms and so forth. So there may be that we have a period of real liberation of the whole body politic rather than a system. And anyway, you had that.
Liberation from menial labor.
Not only from menial labor, but from hierarchical political organization of who's running the society. It's almost always been a plutocratic class. And then they called it different things, but they had a plutocratic leadership class. And then came Rome. That was definitely something that Jesus took exception to and others did. But it was an empire that was built. And you had a class, you finally got to be where you had a, you know, a dictatorship and that. And it fell apart after about 1,000 years. And then you had 1,000 years of kings. And the kings would set, they're living in splendor in the castle, and all the people, by and large, were serfs wallowing around in the mud of poverty, which was only possible. And then there came a break with that. That was about 1,000 years. It still holds. They still have counts going around, and we have a queen in England, for crying out loud.
I would say
And then finally came Industrial Revolution, then came the steam engine, then came Adam Smith, then came Hume, then came the United States. And that's a model that's been set up, supposedly good for all time. And it's now run by a bunch of political leaders and capitalists and bankers, and they're running the world. And everybody else is more or less serfs on their estate, where all the assets are owned by a tiny plutocratic class, as always it has been.
That's exactly, I think, what my hero, Henry George, hinted at, and I think he's the only person that really hits the nail in the head, because
on the head, you say.
On the head, yes.
I like better in the head. I think
I
like it better. I think we've coined a term that'll live.
Okay, in the head. Right, because as long as you have the mechanism of a rent collection,
okay, good. Let's try.
Then you cannot claim that your system is not feudalistic. As long as you have people collecting unearned income.
Spell it out. What do you mean? Feudalistic.
A feudalistic. The standard feudalistic system meant that the feudal lord was reaping.
Latifundistas.
Yes, he was reaping the work of his subordinates, of the serfs. They were doing all the hard work, and without him, just with the privilege, just with the claim of a title, privilege, which is going to be part of the panel that we're going to have in the upcoming Left Forum, June 7th. Just with the paper, he collected all the blood and sweat and tears of.
But that was backed up by armies that could conquer. And by brute force, just
of course,
as it is now.
So now we have less excuse, because right now this system is imposed without that much violence. So we accept the rent collection mechanism. Nobody has imposed it on us. I mean, sure. I mean, if you talk about colonialism and how this system has been applied, for example, in Africa, in South America, in the countries.
After Columbus, it was the whole damn world. They colonized the whole world, Europe.
And now we have a neocolonialism. Neocolonialism. Look at Greece, for example, which is a mature economy, which is turned back down to the Stone Age. I mean, maybe that's a little bit over dramatic.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
But that's we're not free of those tendencies, and I see the root of it.
Okay. Is land tenure or land ownership? What about ownership of capital assets?
That's another big discussion.
The land is part of a capital asset base that some people will have. There's also factories and buildings and institutions.
Land, and that's where Henry George is so ingenious. Is not the land, the dirt. Is anything man-made.
Okay, that's a big difference.
Exactly. Yeah, right. And many people, even in the Georgist movement, they don't understand that.
Let's introduce Henry George. He's a giant.
He's a
turn
giant.
of the 19th, 20th century. He had a wide following. Leo Tolstoy. He had Mark Twain.
Churchill, Einstein, John Dewey.
Yeah, John Dewey as well. Yeah.
Yes, John Dewey said that you cannot talk about social issues if you haven't understood Henry George. You cannot call yourself.
No, he was a giant in everything, and he was the progressive community of the time.
Yes, and he was, the bad thing is that he was despised by all sides of the political spectrum.
Really, of the established political spectrum.
Yes, because Marx and the left. Marx hated George. Actually, he called him the last ditch of capitalism because Henry George was all about freedom, free markets, and he's a prototype capitalist, but he's also a prototype socialist.
Okay.
But see, George's socialism is one that emerges naturally from free enterprise.
Well, okay.
And while in Marx, it kind of, he says, kill the capitalists. It has to be ad hoc. It has to be enforced. With George, economic justice is emergent.
Yeah. Okay.
It comes out naturally, and that's the big difference between the two.
Through the evolutionary process of events and institutions and that sort of thing.
Free enterprise, a level playing field, which cannot be assured if you have the rent collection mechanism.
Rentier.
The rentier, exactly.
Yeah, but back to that, I heard you say, come out of your thinking and so forth. You said that it represented everything other than not only land, the dirt, but it represented. Let's use the term capital assets, okay? Ownership, and then everything that was not labor-based.
Yes. Well, so capital is land with labor input. So in a sense, capital is an iffy, is a term which is not really very clear because a capital can be thought of as congealed labor.
That's where it is thought of, particularly on the left, and Marx and Engels thought that
But capital is part of the, is an active factor of production. Capital helps labor. So that's where Marx, I think, got it, or maybe the Marxists got it wrong. I think Marx had, in the first chapter, he says many things right, but then people focus too much on when he tries to make a theory of capital as a form of exploitation, and then he loses the game completely. He loses the understanding. He loses grasp with real economy.
Yeah, well,
and he tries to abstract capital, but capital cannot be abstract. Capital is raw materials, is land transformed by labor. So you can very easily extract the productive part of capital and the unproductive part of capital. That's actually.
Were you talking finance capital as opposed to
It ties with that because
particularly relevant today.
Exactly, because finance. They say the finance is the art of shuffling money around until you make it disappear.
Well, that's what's happened in the recent experience.
Exactly.
We saw this fellow Les Leopold who talked to us the other day about hedge funds.
Exactly.
And algorithms are coming now. And
exactly. And he also hit the nail on the head. because he says and that there is a decoupling between what financial between face value and real economic value. And actually that's the mechanism of rent creation in the financial markets.
Back again to Henry George.
Exactly. And many people, I think Michael Hudson is the foremost, the person that I've the only person I've heard making that distinction.
Who?
Michael Hudson.
I don't know Michael Hudson. Share, please.
No, he used to be actually director of research at the Henry George School back, I think, in the 90s, but he left since. He's going to be at the LEP Forum too.
Okay.
And we have a good relationship. We're in contact, and he's advising governments. He advised the government of Estonia, I think, and he writes. Usually, he's on the media.
You have another giant in Gaffney, don't you?
Oh, of course. Gaffney, but Gaffney and Hudson, I consider them to be like the two foremost figures in Georgism, even though Hudson will deny that he's a Georgist.
Hudson's still with us?
Yes,
He's living.
He's alive and kicking. He swims 1 hour every day. He's very active and live. You should consider having him on the program.
I should like to. We're going to do a program with Mr. Gaffney. He's coming to town next week.
Yes, but I think now I heard Gaffney came to the Henry George School 2 summers ago, I think, and now there is kind of a reconciliation. Now Gaffney, Gaffney did not see the importance of financial. Of the financial system and how through the financial instruments you can hide or you can masquerade rent.
Well,
and that's actually
say that again. Masquerade or hide rent.
Rent.
So
yes,
it's rent.
Basically,
they had to play
you
rent.
Collect. You collect. Without actually producing any economic value.
Right. Well, it may have, I wonder, do you think it's accommodate, well, let's see, the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, AIG came.
Exactly,
and
insurance.
Reinsurance also.
And reinsurance. Think about insurance. If you pay an insurance premium and you get insured, okay, your insurer keeps it right. But let's say you have insurance for 30 years and then your policy ends. If the insurance reason has not happened, there is no reason.
You've just paid all that money for nothing.
Exactly. And that's collecting economic rent. And that ties up a lot because finance is all about risk premiums and hedging and protecting yourself against risk.
Well,
that's what the interest rate.
Well, that's Lloyd's of London.
Exactly.
Goes back to and Swiss.
Which is legitimate. Protecting yourself against risk. That's part of. That's a productive component of interest. That's not usurious interest. However,
commercially insured insurance against risk in the economic order is something reasonable to consider.
Exactly.
And you could also have a reinsuring of that industry by having an element. I like Louis Kelso. I don't know if you ever caught up with Louis Kelso.
Yes, I like the binary economics.
Binary economics has come to be called and everything. And he wanted to have within the federal structure an institution next to the Federal Reserve that would be called the Capital Diffusion Reinsurance Corporation. That is back the faith and credit of the United States to back the insurance industry against loss within the risk within the economic. That's what people are interested in.
Right, but see, that's.
But it got started in the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, and the AIG didn't grow until it didn't get started until about 85 at the earliest. I mean, relatively recent. And they put it all in the private sector.
And the creditor.
And so then AIG built up all this reassuring debt that they could get assets that are going to collapse, put them in the bond market, and collect insurance, and that's what led to 2008 in large measure, I believe.
In the mid-90s, also there is another moment, an ingenious moment. That's the birth of the credit default swaps.
Yeah, well, Swaps and Derivatives Association.
Protecting yourself against default of creditors.
I did a program with the executive director of the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, which is huge. Everybody belongs to that, all the big banks and everything like that. And they had only just got themselves started. And she said it began with the olive growers back in Periclean Greece. Or Lords of London.
Thales from Miletus. He was people were bugging him. He says, Thales, you are a philosopher. That goes back to the being an aspiring philosopher, and that knowledge is really a continuum and unified. It's not fragmented. I don't want to diverge into what division of labor means, but Thales was being flagellated by his competitors.
You say flagellated.
Flagellated. Yes. I remember when I went to the Fulbright, they told me, I said, I asked for a map. And the guy says, you want a map?
Well, a map.
He says,
a map to map the floor.
He says, I want a map. That's when I realized.
Enunciation matters.
Right. In Greek, it's very linear. And so that's where I get. But Thales was being mocked upon. Oh, you're a philosopher. You're good for nothing. Your philosophy is just abstract. It's for nothing. Says, oh, really? And then because he knew philosopher meant he was a meteorologist. He studied the weather patterns and what was their effect on the olive crops. So he wrote the first derivative contracts with the first futures contracts. And he made so much money. He says, you see, knowledge can be useful also in everywhere in the markets.
In terms of the giants in a progressive vein and everything, you would count. Do we go back before George? Let's say who have been the source? Adam Smith.
I would say George goes back even down to Plato. I gave a talk. I gave a talk. I made some 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I think, in the Left Forum, and on the Greek intellectual roots of George. That goes back.
You have a paper? Is that a paper?
Back to Plato? Yes.
Can you give me a link to it? Is it up on the net or something?
I don't think I've put it on the net. It was distributed at the Left Forum. I can find you a copy, or we can have another talk about it. I may actually bring some of those points in the upcoming forums, the upcoming panels at the Left Forum. And but then he goes from Plato down, then Turgot, the French physiocrats, Limpo unique. Henry George talk about the single tax, which is the tax on land values. It's not a tax on land; it's a tax on land values. That's another
tax
subtle
on land values.
Okay, it's not a tax.
That was crucial to George.
Yes, and it goes back to Limpo unique. That was put forth, I think, by Turgot, the French physiocrats, which is again. That's the tax on land, basically on the natural resources, on anything that's non-man-made. If you collect for you
anything that's man-made,
anything you didn't make, that's not
man-made, like in the sense of labor.
Non-man-made. For example, oil, while it's in the ground, it's non-man-made. Well, human beings did not make it.
Spell it out. Go ahead.
Yes.
Spell it out.
Now, the oil industry is a very good example. Yes, that's a natural resource. The bandwidth that nobody made the bandwidth.
Well, they did. You couldn't have done it without. You couldn't have done it without DARPA and all that. There was a lot of human input to making that.
Exactly.
So why
and the same with oil.
Man-made?
No, exactly.
You can't get oil without an oil drill.
Of course. That's where capital comes in. So you have land, a non-man-made resource, and you apply labor assisted by capital to make something useful. Now, just because, and then you put a price on it. Now, to extract a barrel of oil, that right now it's $10, and people say it's going up. However, at the same time, the price of oil goes up. So it's not that somebody's been, the surplus value that's been charged for oil, it also goes up.
That's Marx.
It's George.
George.
See, the surplus value, when you charge, let's say with $15, all the labor and capital has been paid off. All the people who dug, who extracted, who refined it, who packaged it, who shipped it, who sold it, it's all been paid for. Now, so there is a surplus That's an economic rent a la George that's been charged, which is that doesn't correspond to any productive input.
It continues in
exactly.
perpetuity.
That's a privilege. Because I had the privilege to extract it, I put $15 in it, and I'm charging 100.
But
that's economic rent. People claim, oh, you have every right to charge whatever you want.
That's also the source of a lot of past savings that is used in order to put up for collateral to make an investment that's going to pay for itself out of its future earnings.
Exactly. That's where Henry George comes in, because if you're going to put the rent in, if you're going to reinvest it, let's say you're going to hire more, then that's not rent anymore because it became wages. If you're going to reinvest, it becomes inventories, it becomes capital. So the rent, it depends, you collected, that's not bad. George did not say, like Marx would say, kill the landlord. No.
Kill the landlord?
Kill the landlord. George does not say the landlord. Actually, George saves the landlord from the gallows because he says the landlord is basically the tax collector. He collects societally created values, because that's what the surplus is. And that's where Marx got it wrong, I think, or at least the Marxists got it wrong. That the surplus, and I think you have also pointed out that the surplus that an economic unit produces does not belong to that economic unit, because that value was not created by that economic unit, but by the society who bought the economic unit's product. And I think that's a point where actually I have debated with Rick Wolf.
Oh, Richard Wolf, yeah.
Richard Wolf last summer.
He's really coming on strong now, yeah.
Yes, and actually he was the teacher of our ex-prime minister, the ex-Greek prime minister, which I'm trying to have on my Greek panel at the Left Forum, George Papandreou. And of course, Rick Wolf, he's a Marxist, one of the leading Marxist thinkers and economists. And we had the debate about that last summer at Columbia when he was, and he paused for a second when I told him this dichotomy. And he says, because he was giving the graph where labor productivity has basically risen exponentially, but labor wages have stayed stagnant. That's the standard graph that economists make their living for the past 5 years after the crisis. And the big question is, who gets that productivity surplus? And the Marxists say, oh, the economic unit, but George, and I think, except the Marxists, nobody else says that. Because that value, if you think about it, is created by the consumer. If you are the economic unit and you sell me something, me, the buyer, creates that value. If you tell me it's $100, it's $100.
Was that Keynesian supply? Is that the demand side versus supply side and all that? Mundell and that?
Yes, that's the dichotomy between supply side and demand side. If there is no demand, like if I make the fanciest, I give sometimes the example of cryptography, of Pythagoras, who created the algorithms that we use today to do our cryptography. The algorithms to factor a number into prime factors. A prime number is a number
pi.
Pi is an irrational
Pi Day now. They're celebrating Pi Day. They want to make it a national holiday.
Oh yeah,
March 14th. That's
because it's 3.414.
Right. But it's
and also ad infinitum.
And guess who else's birthday is March 14th? Moi. I want that day to be made a tribute to science because of Albert Einstein, and I want all the kiddies out of school on my birthday.
That's
so that we can all skip down to the ice cream.
That's great.
Yeah, you get behind that. Make it a national holiday to celebrate intellectual contributions instead of a bunch of generals.
Pi, also like E, the basis of the natural logarithms, they're called transcendental numbers. So they're numbers that cannot be expressed as solutions of polynomial equations.
But we only got a little bit left, and let me make another thing. If you're looking, like I'm looking at evolution and looking at the universe and all that kind of thing and everything, and one of the unique characteristics of the Homo sapiens species, it's only, 200,000 years, right? Just an eye blink in terms of evolutionary. One of the things that we had, two things we had that came up out of Homo habilis, out of Africa, was the ability to have a self-reflective consciousness that can ask the larger issues or ask the larger questions, what's it all about, that say, I don't think is characteristic of a crocodile or other other creatures.
Or at least we don't think crocodiles.
Yeah. Now we want to keep in mind ecology and everything's. It's all one Gaia system. It's all related. We understand. But you had that, and then the other thing that they were able to do uniquely, mankind as a species, was to extend their consciousness through the use of tools and technology into the environment and make the environment other than in an Eden-like sense was the way in which they created the environment. It's different between wandering till you find a cave in which you can shelter and building a house with a furnace and air conditioning. You can make the environment other in a unique way. I mean, ants to do things and everything, but that's a unique thing, and that characteristic of our consciousness is now coming full term, and that the production of goods and services or anything economic that you can do, apart from the nuances of taxing and land tax and all that sort of thing, is that the input into production in terms of how you measure that is usually measured in productivity, and that's probably always linked to labor productivity, and you should have a term. You should have a term called productiveness of the overall system, of which the trend is for it to be technological extensions of our capability. It's not just the resources, but a technological extension of that, and that is all owned by a tiny plutocratic class through corporate stock and through corporate ownership.
And through the system of intellectual property, which is, I think, another masqueraded way to collect rent.
Well, okay, now you get, that's good. I want to learn from you. I want to get the importance of George, because he's early in that sort of thing. But if you get to a point where, like my guy that I liked was Kelso. He's the only one I know that did it. He wrote with Mortimer Adler, a preeminent American philosopher, who wrote in 1958 a book that has a controversial title called The Capitalist Manifesto. A lot of people, progressive, would take exception with that.
That's along the same lines as George, because George said that capitalism and socialism are actually, they're on the same team.
Well,
and they're both finding the feudal lord or the rent collectors. And another last point I want to make is that the land tax, the single tax, as George called it, is not a tax. It's an accounting shift. Basically, the rent collector collects on behalf of the society, with the only difference, imagine it's the IRS. Everybody, if you pay rent, that's your contribution to the tax system. And we have made studies where actually we have the rent fund is so big, we can take all our social needs.
Certainly in New York City.
Exactly, funded from there, and we don't even have to get get most of it. We don't have we don't have to tax capital. We don't have to tax labor. But if you call capital congealed,
that's
masqueraded
the value of labor. That's
masqueraded rent.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Marxists call it, surplus value of labor.
I don't know if it belongs to labor. That's a big discussion, because labor gets what, like, if you have a free market, labor will get what it's going to get.
Well, if you have a free market, if you do, rather you do. But anyway, on this other thing, the equation, the input to production, let's say on one side you put labor, on the other side you put everything else, okay? That includes natural resources as well as structures and things like that.
Oh, structures is capital,
No.
Capital is on the other side, is on the productive side. We have the passive side. Land and resources is the passive factor of production.
Well, all right, but you're wanting to get distinct. I'm saying we combine them. You combine the input, the result of the fact of the melding of the two is that you have a productive capability that is not necessarily tied into and only to be seen through, particularly in terms of distributing demand, through labor participation in a productive process that is increasingly capital intensive. They got on the Science Channel now. You ever see that on television? They got a thing on there that how it's made. Practically everything.
It's a great program.
Practically everything that's going, they go through thing after thing. And what surprises me is not only algorithmically, I mean the internet and the information, but robotics is coming on so strong. Practically everything in a mass-produced economy is now made by robots. And the people do not have any ownership stake. They never think of having a piece of ownership of the overall capital base by which things are actually being produced as a means of distributing demand. And Keynes said in a letter to his grandchildren, 1930, you're going to be confronted with something that is hard to understand. Massive, technologically induced unemployment.
What's
We're
wrong
going to
with
have
that?
unemployment, but they don't have an alternative way of relating the citizens to the productive process as a way of distributing demand and buying power to clear the market.
In mathematics and sciences, when you create theories, that's what you do as a theoretical physicist. You create a theory. A first test you do is you test limiting cases. What happened at the extremes?
Yeah.
At zero, at infinity, what happens there?
Yeah.
So here is the question, theoretical question. So assume we reach a state of such technological advance where everything is going to be made by machines.
Yeah, right.
Then what's going to be the economic
well, how about
it's going to be just rent.
Well, okay, you're saying just rent. That's George. Okay.
Exactly.
I'm saying how about
how are going to apportion the rent in that future state? That's George. He's brilliant in his futuristic approach, because then it's only rent.
How about a system where instead of forming capital, where it's all based on past savings, if you have past savings, you put it up collateral. You make an investment, pays for itself in 5-6 years, and you can tap into the future, the capability, rather than depending on past wealth, what only favors the plutocratic past savings.
Past wealth.
And how about how you set up a thing where the capital is formed in a way where the ownership, let's just say, corporate stock is owned by everybody as a way of distributing income that could make possible a market clearing capability and bring freedom and leisure for people to lead autodidactic life of their mind and spirit and of the things that good as civilization.
One of the axioms of political economy.
Does that work with George or not?
Absolutely, and I will explain it.
We got to get together on this.
Yes, exactly. It's totally compatible with George. Actually, I think George is the only person that can whose foundation can allow for something like that to happen. And I'll explain to you why. First of all, human beings have infinite needs and desires. You don't need
No. Okay, go on. Yeah.
Yes, sky is the limit. It doesn't mean that at the same...
with an ecological order, yeah. But
this doesn't mean that you have to be ecologically expansive. Actually, that's the regressive human being. The progressive human being,
there are tyrannies.
That's the Epicurean dichotomy.
There are tyrannies
you can become rich by increasing your haves or by decreasing your wants.
Okay, there are tyrannies. There are tyrannies that exist, and one of the tyrannies that exists in this universe, unfortunately, is time. We've run out of time.
Oh,
we just got wound up. So thank you very much for coming in. We just got started on this, and it's your pleasure. Well, it's too bad we're coming to the end. It's your pleasure to have the perceptions of Yanni, and you say the name. Your name.
Tziligakis.
Tzilkigakis, as you can see, physicist and extraordinary supporter of Henry George and other major things, major intellectual. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for such a very well-led life. I look forward to all our future communications. In the audience, thanks for viewing, and we'll be coming back again tomorrow. Yanni, thanks a lot for everything.
Thank you, Harold.
Okay.